The day my uncle kicked me out, the sky cracked open with thunder like the world itself was furious. Thunder cracked like a judge's gavel across the suburbs of Tampa, sending a chill through the sticky summer air. Not a playful summer drizzle, but a furious storm wind, howling rain pounding the pavement in heavy, unrelenting sheets. I remember standing at the edge of our manicured circular driveway, watching as my Uncle Rick hurled my worn-out backpack onto the soaked asphalt like it was a bag of garbage he'd been waiting weeks to throw away. No niece of mine is going to throw away her potential chasing some low-grade tech job, he bellowed, shaking the resignation letter I had carefully printed and left on his oversized mahogany desk that morning. The ink was probably still drying when he discovered it. The letterhead from Blake & Blake Financial looked absurd above my brief, polite goodbye. His voice reverberated off the peach-colored stucco walls of our family's estate, a house so large it echoed even when you whispered. We are a family of professionals, Samantha. Doctors, MBAs. Partners in respectable firms, not low-level IT help desk flunkies. His words hit harder than the rain, every syllable a slap to the identity I had worked quietly to forge for myself. I stared down at my backpack as it landed in a puddle with a pathetic splash. I knew the most important files, the seed of the fraud detection tool I was coding in secret, were safely backed up to the cloud. But it still hurt. That bag held my battered laptop, the one I'd bought secondhand at a pawn shop, my handwritten journals filled with flowcharts and wireframes, and the last pieces of comfort from the only home I had ever known. Uncle Rick, I said, my voice barely audible beneath the rain and his rage. The tech support job at SecureCorps is just a starting point. I have a roadmap. A roadmap, he scoffed, tossing his head back with a dry, joyless laugh. Samantha Blake, you had a future. A real one. Promotion to junior partner, your engagement to Jonathan Carter, a perfectly respectable path in life. Not this ridiculous startup fantasy. My Aunt Maggie appeared in the doorway behind him, hesitant and uncertain, wringing the edge of her silk blouse in her hands like she didn't know whether to intervene or just disappear. John's parents invited us to brunch on Sunday, she said softly. He still wants to see you. Talk, maybe. I canceled the engagement, I replied, swallowing hard. Because I want my own career. I don't want to marry into security, I want to build it myself. Rick's expression shifted instantly, hardening into something colder than the storm outside. You're throwing away a Wharton finance degree to answer help desk tickets to become a nobody, he spat. If he'd taken even 2 minutes to actually read the business plan I'd emailed him months ago, buried under the pile of quarterly reports on his desk, he'd know I had a strategy. That job at SecureCorps, it wasn't an end, it was a foothold. But he never listened, not once. Then go, he said, his voice suddenly devoid of emotion. Chase your little dream, but don't come crawling back when it fails. Rick, Aunt Maggie whispered, her hand gently touching his arm. He didn't even look at her. Just turned and stormed back inside, slamming the front door behind him with such force the windows shuddered. She's not my niece anymore, he said loud enough for me to hear even through the door. I stood motionless in the downpour for a second, chest tight, fists clenched, then bent to pick up my drenched bag with trembling fingers. That moment, cold, soaked to the bone, and completely alone, marked the end of one chapter and the first defiant step into another. 3 years of secret coding sessions, of pretending to care about depreciation schedules and tax loopholes at the family firm, had all led to this stormy goodbye. And somehow, I knew it had to end this way for something better to begin. I turned one last time to face the only place I had ever called home. Aunt Maggie stood still in the open doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the hallway behind her, casting a faint glow on her pale, uncertain expression. One slender hand clung to the doorframe as though even her body wasn't sure which direction to lean toward me or back into the silence of Rick's empire. The wind tugged at the hem of her blouse, and the rain, now softening, drizzled over her heels. She looked like a woman caught between 2 decades of loyalty and 1 minute of doubt. Aunt Maggie, I said gently, my voice a murmur carried away too quickly by the storm. Aren't you going to say anything? Her gaze flicked toward the interior of the house, to the leather-clad study where Uncle Rick was almost certainly pouring a glass of something expensive, his pride seething like smoke behind closed doors. Her lips parted, then closed again. Finally, in a whisper barely audible, she said, Maybe in a few months when you realize this was a mistake. The door closed as slowly and delicately as a curtain falling after a tragic play. And with that final breathless click, my ties to the Blake estate, the Spanish-tiled mansion with its sculpted hedges, palm-lined driveway, and the polished bronze plaque that read, Blake and Blake Financial, severed completely. I turned away, walked through the rain to my dented old Honda Civic, and drove into the darkness with headlights illuminating nothing but possibilities and potholes. My new place was more laughable than livable. A converted pool house behind a crumbling bungalow in a forgotten suburb with plumbing that groaned like it resented every flush and cockroaches bold enough to challenge me for counter space. But it had fiber internet and just enough space for 2 monitors, a cheap IKEA desk, and my towers humming like the start of something sacred. Secure Core Technologies paid me just enough to stay alive barely, but that wasn't why I'd taken the job. Every day I wore the headset like a costume and played the part of the tech support girl who apologized for crashed browsers and explained for the 100th time how to clear a cache. But beneath that smiling, helpful facade, I was absorbing everything. I studied their systems like a hawk, understanding the rhythms of their architecture, memorizing which doors were locked and which had been left cracked open. And every night I coded. What began as a crude Excel macro hidden in the middle of audit reviews had begun to mutate, evolve like a fledgling creature finally tasting freedom. My algorithm was growing leaner, sharper, more intuitive. It could identify fraud patterns so subtle, they looked like coincidence to the untrained eye and neutralize them before they blossomed into breaches. I felt like I was sculpting a weapon that could outthink thieves before they knew what they'd stolen. 2 months and my phone rang. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. Samantha came, the voice I hadn't heard since the storm. John Carter sounded exactly as I remembered, silken, polished, practiced. This has gone far enough. My father says Rick might be willing to reconsider. You could still come back. We could still do the wedding. Just put this phase behind you. I didn't answer. I didn't argue. I hung up and blocked his number. That part of my life of me was over. 6 months passed and then it happened. It was during a random quality assurance scan that my tool, still running quietly under the radar, flagged a hidden exploit deep in Secure Core's system, an anomaly so deeply buried their best defense software had missed it entirely. My pulse raced. I didn't celebrate. I documented everything, then submitted the report anonymously. But a few days later, the anonymity ran out. I was summoned to the top floor into a sleek glass office that shimmered like authority. The head of cybersecurity, a stern woman named Rachel Alvarez, sat behind a desk that felt more like a cross-examination bench. Her hands folded, her eyes sharp. "Can you explain how you found this?" she asked. I didn't flinch. Actually, I said, my voice calm and clear, "I've been developing a new protocol. I can walk you through it." 3 hours later, I left that office with a development contract clutched in my hand. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't large, but it was mine. It was the moment I stepped out from behind the headset and into my real role as a builder, a visionary. That night, I opened my inbox and wrote a short email with the subject line, "Update, I'm not coming back." The reply arrived the next morning. It came from Aunt Maggie's email, but every condescending syllable reeked of Uncle Rick's voice. Tech support to junior developer, hardly the kind of legacy we expected from a Wharton graduate. The Carters asked about you at brunch. John is still unmarried. I didn't even bother finishing it. I closed the message and dove back into my code. The next year bled into itself long nights, burnt coffee, and lines of Python that started to feel like poetry. My protocol matured. It grew teeth. It became faster, smarter, and more effective than anything else on the market. That initial contract from Secure Core opened one door and then another. Stripe reached out, then Apple, then a discreet email from someone at the Department of Defense asking for a meeting. I left the guest house behind for a modest 1-bedroom, then upgraded to a condo, then to a polished modern loft in the city's tech corridor where the future hummed outside every window. I hired my first developer, then 3 more, then an entire floor of engineers, analysts, and security architects. That was when Blake Shield Systems was born. But I made a choice early on. I left my name off every registration, every article, every public mention. Let the world think some anonymous genius was behind the firewall. It was safer that way. Quieter. Aunt Maggie's messages kept coming, passive attempts at reconnection thinly veiled behind links to legal galas or articles about John's climb through the political ranks. I never replied. I archived them without opening a single one. Investors came knocking. Venture capitalists sent flowers, personalized pens, even vacation packages. Acquisition offers reached into the billions. I turned them all down. Control wasn't just important, it was sacred. I had earned this. I had built this. I wouldn't hand it off for applause or cash. The press wanted a face, though. So I gave them Logan Pierce, the kind of charismatic, camera-friendly CEO who could charm a reporter while spinning a pitch deck with his other hand. He became the face of Blake Shield, while I remained the mind beneath the surface. And then came the day Serena, my chief of staff, knocked lightly on the frame of my office door, her head poking in like she was afraid to interrupt something divine. "Sam," she said, "Forbes is asking again. They're finalizing the 30 under 30 list." "Tell them to talk to Logan," I said, eyes fixed on my screen. "They don't want Logan," she said. "They already know. They're publishing with or without you." I froze, my hands hovered above the keyboard. "How?" Serena shrugged. "Probably that intern from Secure Corps, the one who never signed the NDA." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window, the city shimmering beneath me. I pictured Rick's face the day he threw my laptop into the rain. The rage, the judgment, the disbelief. "Fine," I said after a long pause. "I'll do it, but on one condition." 2 weeks later, I sat alone in my glass-walled office, sunlight gleaming off the desk, an advance copy of Forbes in my hands. Across the cover, in bold, unapologetic type, Samantha Blake, 26-year-old founder of Blake Shield Systems, youngest self-made cybersecurity billionaire. My phone buzzed again, persistent, vibrating insistently against the edge of my desk, like it could sense the weight of history it carried. I glanced at the screen. Maggie Blake. My aunt's name glowed beneath the soft halo of the display. I didn't answer. I watched it ring slowly, deliberately, until it slipped into voicemail purgatory. There was nothing left to say. Not now, maybe not ever. But for those who have ever been dismissed with a patronizing smile, who've heard their dreams labeled unrealistic, unstable, or worse, unprofessional this moment, this culmination was for you. If you're still building in silence, know this Samantha Blake story isn't over, and neither is yours. The Forbes article landed like a meteor on a quiet Tuesday morning, igniting a ripple through the financial and tech industries alike. By Wednesday, the fallout had reached Blake & Blake Financial in devastating waves. 3 major clients, cornerstones of Rick Blake's empire, had quietly jumped ship, signing contracts with firms protected by cutting-edge cybersecurity systems. My systems. By Thursday, 5 more had followed. The hemorrhage had become a cascade. The phone on my desk wouldn't stop buzzing, vibrating so frequently, I finally slid it into a drawer, just to dull the noise. 37 missed calls from my aunt, 18 from my uncle. And yes, even John Carter had crawled back from whatever polished rock he'd been hiding under to send me a LinkedIn message. The timing was no coincidence. Word had surely reached his father's consultancy firm, 2 contracts terminated over security vulnerabilities. The irony could have cut steel. Friday came with the scent of rain and desperation. Natalie Kim, ever composed, poked her head into my office with a hesitancy I hadn't seen from her in months. "Sam," she said carefully, "your uncle and aunt are downstairs." I didn't look up, and they brought backup. My eyes flicked toward her. Backup. She nodded grimly. The Carters, senior and junior. Of course. This wasn't a family visit. It was a last-ditch negotiation, disguised as concern. "They're not on the schedule," I said, adjusting the belt on my blazer, voice cool and clipped. "No, but your uncle tried intimidating the security desk with legal talk, and your aunt's crying. A lot." I turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me. Beyond the glass, the city glinted beneath a sharp autumn sun, and from this high up, the buildings bearing the Blake Shield Systems logo stood tall and untouchable. "Send them up," I said, "and activate Project Eleanor." She nodded, a trace of a smirk flickering across her otherwise neutral face. Project Eleanor, my personal favorite, named after the only person in my family who had believed in me. My grandmother, the one who had given me my first computer in secret, who whispered dreams into my ear when the rest of the family scoffed. Now her name was attached to a live demo system, one that would light up the office with a visual symphony of every breach we'd thwarted in the past 24 hours. As the elevator hummed its ascent to the 30th floor, my office transformed. Wall-mounted screens blinked to life in synchronized precision. Digital maps exploded in motion, attack vectors traced in red intercepted intrusions, in green comparative stats of compromised versus secured clients. It was breathtaking. It was unignorable. The elevator doors opened with a chime, and Rick Blake stormed in like a man with something to reclaim. He gripped the Forbes magazine in one hand, like it was both evidence and accusation. Behind him, Maggie followed, her eyes rimmed in red mouth, tight with barely restrained grief. Judge Thomas Carter and his son John brought up the rear, stiff-backed stoic and smelling faintly of cologne and old-world entitlement. "How dare you," Rick barked, holding up the magazine like a warrant. "How dare you humiliate your family like this?" I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch a beat longer than was comfortable. "Humiliate," I echoed, eyes cool. "You mean by building a billion-dollar company that protects firms like yours from bleeding out their clientele? Please do go on." "You lied to us," Maggie cried, her voice trembling. "All this time pretending to be some IT assistant." "I never lied," I said, voice soft but sharp enough to cut glass. "You never asked." Too busy forwarding brunch invites and articles about John's campaign. Too busy being disappointed to actually listen. John stepped forward, then smile rehearsed and faintly hopeful. "Sam, come on. This doesn't have to be messy. We can realign, refocus, merge our—" "A merger," I cut in, gesturing toward the live displays illuminating every corner of the room. "No one skips the audit, not even family." The temperature in the room dropped. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of lips, devoid of warmth. "We're not just clients," Rick snapped. "We're your family. You owe us." I stepped from behind my desk, meeting him face to face. "Do I said, measured. "Let's discuss what I owe. Should we start with the day you threw my belongings into the rain? Or maybe when you spread rumors at the Gulf Bay Country Club that I'd had a nervous breakdown, or perhaps I said voice like steel. Now we can skip to the part where you tried to have me declared legally incompetent so you could freeze my trust." His expression darkened like a gathering storm. "That was for your own good. You were—" Throwing away the future you planned, I interrupted, walking back to my desk. With a tap of my finger, the screens behind me changed now, displaying Blake Shield's real-time stock value and our most recent federal contract, $2.1 billion and rising. "You mean this?" I asked, pointing. "The future that now protects 80% of the Fortune 500. The one eclipsing every accounting firm in the region, including yours." Maggie sank into the nearest chair, like her bones had turned to paper, her scarf clenched in a trembling fist. "But why didn't you tell us?" she asked, almost pleading. "Why hide all this?" "Because you wouldn't have listened," I replied, folding my arms. "You were too worried about appearances, about John, about what the neighborhood would whisper over cocktails." John made one last desperate attempt, stepping closer. "We can move past that. Let's just grab dinner, reconnect." I pressed a button. A digital contract expanded across the main screen, Blake Shield's standard audit agreement. "If your firms want to work with us," I said, calm as a surgeon, "this is what you'll sign. The fee is $50,000 per audit, non-negotiable." Judge Carter sputtered, face flushed. "$50,000? That's outrageous." "Actually," I said, tilting my head, "it's a bargain. Ask your former clients." I returned to my seat. "Natalie will send the paperwork. Standard processing is 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks, Rick nearly shouted. "We're hemorrhaging clients now." "Should have thought of that," I said, brushing invisible lint from my blazer before declaring cybersecurity beneath your dignity. I reached for my tablet. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting." Maggie stood, her voice cracking. "Samantha Isabel Blake, this isn't over." I didn't look up. "It is," I said, nodding toward the guards flanking the elevator. "They'll show you out." As they shuffled back toward the lift, I added, "Oh, and about that reserved parking spot at Blake & Blake. You might want to reassign it. The Blake name carries more weight in tech these days." Not long after the elevator had swallowed them whole, Rick, Maggie, the Carters, and all their unspoken expectations, Natalie returned, her silhouette outlined by the soft glow of the office lights. She held a steaming cup of coffee in one hand, a small weathered picture frame in the other. "She left this," she said simply, stepping forward and placing both gently on my desk. "Your aunt. She wanted to give it to you herself, but—" Natalie shrugged, her expression laced with empathy. "She didn't have the courage." I looked down. In the frame was a photograph worn at the edges, faded but still vibrant where it mattered. A 12-year-old girl sat hunched over a massive beige CRT monitor in the corner of a cluttered den, her face lit not just by the computer screen, but by something more essential, a spark, a raw and unpolished dream. The desk around her was a mess of cables and notebooks, and beside her, just out of frame, a familiar figure had once stood with quiet pride. Grandma Eleanor. A smile touched my lips, bittersweet and slow. Of course, Rick had hated that machine. Computers will rot her brain. He'd scoffed with the disdain of a man born into tradition. But Grandma Eleanor, sharp-eyed and soft-spoken, had leaned in close that Christmas and whispered, "Keep going, Mika. Let them count dollars, you count ideas." Then, as the family passed dishes and platitudes, she slipped me books on logic gates and C++, wrapped in red ribbon and defiance. "Some people build empires from spreadsheets," she'd told me later, her voice low and certain. "You'll build yours with code." I gently placed the photo beside the Forbes cover, already displayed on my desk. On one side, a wide-eyed girl dreaming in silence. On the other, the woman who turned that silence into circuitry and built a billion-dollar firewall from pure will. The weeks that followed were a parade of half-hearted apologies disguised as outreach. Emails arrived from Aunt Maggie almost daily, some contrite, some performative, most teetering between nostalgia and negotiation. Rick's firm, perhaps in one final act of reluctant surrender, submitted to our full audit and paid the required fees without another word. John, never one to miss an opportunity for dramatic symbolism, had a brand new cherry-red Tesla delivered to the front of my building. The note read, "For the journey you're now ready for." I donated it to Girls Who Code without opening the driver's door. I stayed focused. My team launched a revolutionary adaptive AI protocol that rewrote the rules of breach detection. We acquired 2 bleeding-edge startups in under 6 months. My net worth, once a theoretical goal scribbled in a dorm notebook, quietly doubled, then tripled. But none of it, not the financial headlines, nor the silent envy of former rivals, could distract me from one date circled on both my calendar and my heart. Grandma Eleanor's birthday. The first since she had passed. I drove to the cemetery alone, dressed simply with a bundle of roses cradled in one arm and a laminated copy of the Forbes issue tucked beneath the other. The wind swept gently across the headstones, as if even nature understood the gravity of remembrance. I knelt, placed the flowers at her resting place, and laid the magazine beside them like an offering. "You were right," I whispered. "I built something bigger than they could ever imagine." I stayed for a long time, letting the silence settle over me like a blanket stitched from gratitude and grief. Behind me I sensed movement, footsteps hesitant and slow. I turned. Maggie stood there, her posture not polished, not guarded, just human. She looked smaller somehow, her designer coat too heavy for the weather, her face stripped of its usual precision. When she spoke, her voice trembled. "The roses," she said softly. "That computer, that was her idea," she insisted. "Said she saw something in you." "I know," I replied, unsure what emotion was rising. "She said I had fire. She said it was the kind she recognized," Maggie continued, then paused. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her sleeves. I was against it. But she believed. She always did." She reached into her handbag and produced another photo, this one newer, taken years after the first. It was me and Grandma Eleanor laughing amid a tangle of wires and snack wrappers. We looked like we'd just built a rocket out of spare parts. "She left this for you," Maggie said, "and a letter. I was supposed to give it to you if you ever succeeded, but I didn't think you would, not in tech anyway." I accepted the envelope, hands trembling more than I expected. Inside, in Eleanor's looping, deliberate script, was a letter I hadn't realized I'd been waiting my whole life to read. "Nakama," it began, her nickname for me. "If you're reading this, you've already done it. You've proven them wrong. But more importantly, you've proven me right. I always knew." I swallowed, hard eyes scanning each word like a sacred thread. "Your parents don't understand. They never did. They thought tradition was safety. But real success isn't about repeating the past. It's about writing your own future. Prove them wrong, sweetheart. Then prove them right about one thing, that you are still their daughter even if you chose your own road. Love always, Grandma Eleanor." When I looked back up at Maggie, I really looked at her, saw the creases of fatigue behind her eyes, the weariness of someone who'd spent too long maintaining appearances while sacrificing connection. "I have a board meeting in an hour," I said quietly, carefully folding the letter and slipping it into my desk drawer. "But maybe we could get coffee next week. Just us." Her lips trembled, eyes filling. "I'd like that." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it might be a beginning. That night I returned to my office and added 2 new pieces to the wall. The photo of Grandma and me laughing in that mess of wires and the letter framed and mounted like a manifesto. Between them I placed a single page of code, the original rough-drafted prototype of the fraud detection protocol. The moment it all began. My phone buzzed. Natalie again. Sam Rick's firm just passed the audit. Contract signed, full terms accepted. I turned to the wall. 12-year-old me grinned back from a clunky monitor flanked by a legacy redefined and a dream fulfilled. Good, I said. Tell them one more thing. They'll need to update their parking permit. The Blake name holds more weight over here now. Because sometimes success isn't about vengeance or even validation. Sometimes it's about standing in a room you built from broken pieces and realizing you made it. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's about paving your own road home, even if it takes a billion-dollar bridge to get there. So if you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told your dreams don't fit their mold, I hope this story speaks to something in you. Quiet strength doesn't need applause. It needs faith. I built this when no one believed I could, not for them, but for me. If my journey lit a spark in you, take a moment to share your own in the comments. Your turning point, your quiet rebellion, your first breakthrough. I read every single one. And if you're still building, don't stop. Stick around, subscribe to the channel, and like the video, not just for me, but for the next person who needs a reason to keep going. We're only getting started.